What do you think, Gage? Should we get going?
Let's rock.
Okay. All right. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about authentic impact and aligning your mission with your brand. We've all heard the words authenticity and purposeful marketing quite a bit recently, right? And so there's a lot of brands that are almost kind of jumping on this bandwagon of this trend. And what's important is that if you really want to make an authentic impact with your brand, that you do it in a way that is really true to your brand and to yourself. And so we're going to talk a lot about that and some other topics as well. And we're going to have some fun, hopefully, doing it. So before we get into that, just quick intros. I'm Brooke. I am responsible for agency partnerships here at ProQuo. And so through that, I've had the privilege of really getting to know and work closely with Gage Mitchell, who is our guest here today for our talk. He's really an expert in authenticity and authentic impact. He has a brand design agency called Modern Species that really he dedicates his work to helping brands represent themselves authentically. And he's also built a community of CPG leaders who are focused on sustainable practices. And he calls that community Evolve CPG. And he'll tell you a bit more about those two things. Hi, Gage. Welcome. Thanks.
Hello. Thank you.
Before we get into and I kind of hand over the mic to you, I just want to explain why authenticity and authentic impact is important to ProQuo and why it's relevant to ProQuo. So if you don't mind just flipping to the next slide, Gage. I just want to give a brief introduction to ProQuo. So ProQuo is the world's first and only tech platform that is giving brand managers and marketers one place to build their brand strategy, create and optimize their ideas, and also then monitor the performance of their brands in real time live. And they can do all of those three things right within our platform. So if you're a brand that is building an authentic brand and focused on authentic impact, ProQuo's platform can help you with that. We are talking to consumers every single day within your category, helping you to understand, first of all, what is really important in your category when it comes to things like authenticity, and also all of the other things that are important when you're driving your brand to success. And how is your brand stacking up against those things? Where are your strengths and areas for opportunity? And how do you stack up against your competitors? Our AI is then taking all of that rich consumer intelligence every day and crunching it and building out a custom action plan for your brand's marketing so that you are certain about the path that you need to take in order to grow. You can then put any of your ideas into our creative lab and optimize those with a push of a button. So you're certain about your marketing investments, and then you can monitor the impact immediately that those things are having in real time as you launch them into the market and as you grow your brand in terms of its authentic impact and all of the other ways that you're focused on growing your brand. So that is a bit about why this is a relevant topic for us to be bringing to you guys today. And for at that point, I think I'm just going to hand it over to you, Gage.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks for kicking us off, and happy Thursday, everyone. Excited to be here with you today to talk about authentic impact. It's a topic that I'm particularly passionate about. It's something I've led my career around, as Brooke mentioned, and I'll explain a little bit more there. But again, as she mentioned, we're talking about making sure you're aligning your mission with your brand today, in case that wasn't clear yet. So during the conversation today, we're going to start with a little bit of why me, like why am I here sharing this specific topic. Then we'll talk more about something I think we all already agree on, which is that when it comes to branding, authenticity matters, right? So after we set that platform to build upon, we'll then dive into the meat or the heart of what we're talking about today, which is when it comes to making it positive impact, relevancy really, really, really matters. We'll show you why. We'll play some games and so on and so forth. And then we'll give you a tool that you can use to make sure your authentic or your impact initiatives are relevant and authentic. So you won't walk away wondering how to implement this. You'll have direct tools to do that. And then, of course, we'll leave you with some pro tips, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A. Speaking of which, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat pod, and Brooke or Bridget will keep an eye on those and let me know if anything pops up while I'm talking, or we'll get to them as soon as we get done with the presentation. All right, so diving in. So as Brooke mentioned, for the last 12 years, I've run an agency called Modern Species. And the reason this is relevant is because the whole purpose of Modern Species is to help mission-driven brands launch, evolve, or grow their brand. And we do that mostly by helping them bring their mission to life through their brand, so it comes across as authentic and expressive and clear and all these awesome things that you want your brand to be, and they can really connect with their consumers. So we've done this quite a bit, is bottom line. And then also for almost 20 years now, I've been in leadership positions with my professional association, AIGA. And one of my most recent roles was helping lead the National Design for Good Task Force, in which we decided that to make it easier for other creatives to help companies live into their impact, or organizations or communities, we created a path to impact methodology that had 5 familiar steps for creatives that led them through the process of designing for sustainable, measurable impact. So the reason this is relevant is because it shows that I'm a geek for frameworks and I like making things easy for people. So we're going to do that for you today. And then lastly, as Brooke mentioned, the most recent kind of initiative is we launched an online community and podcast just earlier this year called Evolve CPG, where we're bringing mission-driven brand leaders together to get further faster. And one of the things we're doing is this Exponential Good Workshop, which just kicked off this week, where we're leading a cohort of brands through a process of scaling their impact exponentially. But with that said, there's also free podcast content and free online community. So check us out if that fits your description or your purpose. All right, so that's a little bit about why me. Now let's talk more about brands. We all know, if you're here on this call, I'm sure you know that building a brand means a lot of different things, but one of the most important things is being authentic with that brand, because the more you can show up as your true self, know exactly who you are, and express that to the world, the stronger your brand will be in multiple ways. But one of the ways we're talking about today is trust. Of course, trust is very important to building a brand for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons we're talking about today is action. By that, I mean, if you trusted ProQuo to deliver you some good content this morning, so you signed up for this webinar and you showed up, right? You took action because of trust. And that's what you want to do if you're trying to make an impact in the world. You don't want to announce something and let it fall flat. So if you have an authentic brand, you will build trust, and that will make it easier for you to get people to take action, whether that's buy your product or participate in your impact. So there are ways to evaluate whether or not your brand is authentic. Lots of different options there, but it can be confusing. So it's helpful to have a tool like ProQuo to help you really analyze that in a strategic way with kind of a holistic system. So one of the awesome things about ProQuo that really excites me about the platform is that they have this framework. You know, I'm a framework geek, like I mentioned before, but they have this 16 drivers that cover rational reasons, emotional reasons why people might be engaging with your brand, as well as seductive and persuasive techniques for you to make sure that your brand is living into its true potential. So within this platform, your brand can be analyzed across all 16 of these characteristics. Some of them will help you understand whether or not you're being authentic. Some of them will help you understand whether or not your product is delivering its promise, and so on and so forth. But we don't have time to talk about all 16 of them today. So we're going to do a little experiment here.
All right, it's time to do a little poll. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little poll up here, and we want to know from you guys which of these drivers you would say is most closely related to authenticity. So go ahead and do that as quickly as you can.
$30 seconds?
30 seconds, okay.
Or it's been 30 seconds.
It's been 30 seconds, okay, let's go.
All right.
All right, let's see what we have here. Interesting, so we have only integrity and transparency being selected here. Those are kind of the most obvious, aren't they? So integrity being about a brand that has good values, really lives by those values, and transparency, you're open and you're honest about the things that you're doing. What's interesting is that clarity and differentiation are two drivers that can also be related to authenticity. So it could be interesting, since those two haven't been selected at all, Gage, for you to maybe talk about those two specifically, and about how you believe those are related to authenticity.
Absolutely. So obviously authenticity doesn't come down to one driver. It is definitely transparency and integrity and clarity, differentiation, and others, but we need to, simplify this for you. So essentially integrity, the way we're seeing that come to life with authenticity, is that when you know who you are as a brand and you live into that true self out into the world, you're going to show up with more integrity. You're going to stand up for what you believe in, because what you believe in is very clear, right? So that one's relatively obvious. Clarity, maybe not as obvious, but the idea behind clarity is that when you know who you are and know who you serve and know how you serve them and how you make their life better, you can more clearly communicate that. And the more clear you are about how you help people, the more your clarity score will go up, right? So how your products fit into their life. And if you're authentic, that'll be more obvious. Differentiation. I think this one is all about, the more you know yourself and the more you are yourself, the more you are uniquely you and nobody else can replicate that. So if you're living into your truths, your story, there's going to be nobody else with your founding story, with your unique product lineup, with your leadership team, with your marketing talent, with all the things that you bring to the world. Nobody can match that. So by being authentic, you're automatically differentiating yourself. And then, of course, with transparency, the more honest you are about who you are, the more you can pull the curtain back and show people some of the not so pretty pieces, because you know who you are and you're cool with that and you're okay with growth and not being perfect. So it opens you up to being more transparent. So if you have a high transparency score, it's likely that you're being more authentic. All right, so thanks for playing that game with us. We'll have some more in a little bit. But now that we're aligned on the fact that brands should be authentic, I think we all agreed on that before, but just wanted to set that foundation. So impact, what do we mean by impact? Well, for today's purposes, what we're talking about is the result of you succeeding in your mission to make people's lives and the world meaningfully better. So it's the positive impact you're making in the world. And I highlighted result because it's not just your intentions, but the actual outcomes that matter. And mission, because obviously impact should be kind of part of your mission, hopefully, if you're a company trying to make the world a better place. And then I also highlighted meaningfully, because you could try to argue that you make people's lives better by entertaining them for 5 minutes on the bus with your little Facebook app. But does that really help their life in a meaningful way? Probably not. So let's focus on more meaningful areas of impact. Speaking of which, these are 3 words that you've probably heard tied to impact before: social impact, environmental impact, and economic impact. Those hopefully go without need of explanation. But what we're showing here is that these 3 things are very interconnected. So oftentimes you might think, you know what, we want to make a social impact with our business. But if you only focus on social aspects and ignore environment and economic impact, you might be creating some unintentional consequences that do more harm than good. So when you're thinking about making something that's better for the environment, you also have to be thinking about how much that's going to impact the economy. Are you driving prices up? Are you putting all the ownership of making that better for the environment on the farmers? When you try to impact social impact, how does that play out with the economy? Are you paying people fairly while you're trying to make that social impact? And so on and so forth. These are all super interconnected. One doesn't exist without the other. So every time you're thinking about where you want to invest in impact, just also think about how that affects the other areas of impact. So now to the meat or heart of this webinar. The whole point, the main thing we want you to remember when you walk away today is that when you're trying to make a positive impact on the world, you should make that relevant to your brand. And I get it. Like, there's so many amazing causes. There's so much you want to do. And that's great. I love that your heart is in the right place. But if you truly want to make an impact, you will make a much bigger impact if that impact is relevant to your brand. Because when it is relevant, you're going to get a lot more FYAs from your community and a lot fewer WTFs, because people will see that as relevant to your brand, relevant to why they care about you as a company, relevant to why they buy your products, and so on and so forth. So it will just seem obvious that you, that brand, is making efforts to make the world a better place in this specific way. Whereas if you don't make an authentic impact attempt, then people are just going to be confused. They're going to wonder why you're involved in this. They're not going to participate. You're going to hurt your brand, and so on and so forth. So by being authentic and relevant with your impact, you're going to get more impact because your community is going to be excited about it and they're going to participate. And you're going to have brand reinforcement because that impact is very much aligned with your brand. So every dollar you spend on your brand or on your impact is going to also reinforce your brand. So it's a win-win in many ways. So if we all agree on that, let's dive into another poll.
All right, we'll go ahead and pull it up. So this one's going to be, which of these 4 drivers, these are a different set of the 16 drivers, which would you say is most closely related to positive impact that Gage just explained?
We should have had some game show music while this was going on.
That's what we just said. A little Jeopardy music. All right. I think we're good. All right, let's see what we have here. Okay, this one's a little bit more mixed. Value for the money is much lower than all of the others. Connection comes up top, then empathy and consistency, and then followed by value for money last. So again, similar to the last poll that we did, all 4 of these are actually related in some way to impact. So Gage, do you want to kind of go ahead and describe those?
Absolutely. So again, there's no one driver that's connected to these things, right? There's lots of drivers. So you're all correct. And some are just more obvious than others. So consistency, of course, if your impact is relevant to your brand, that is going to build more consistency. They're going to see your brand out there in the world saying this, and then your impact is doing this, and it's consistent with what you just said. So obviously, if you're showing up, doing impactful work, and you're scoring high on consistency, you're probably doing the right thing. With connection, that's about like really building a relationship and kind of having shared interests with your audience, with your consumers or beneficiaries. So the more relevant your impact is to your brand, the more they're just going to see you as part of their tribe. And they're going to be like, yeah, I care about those same things too. So you're going to build higher scores on connection. And then value for money. So this one was voted as the lowest, and I'm excited about that because I think this one's one of the sleepers in here. So value for money comes across in 2 different ways. One, for the consumer, let's say I'm in a retail environment and I'm looking to buy some soap. And I see 2 soaps. One on the left is this generic soap. Let's just say it's for $2 and it'll get me clean, and I'm sure it's a good product. And then right next to that on the shelf, also for around $2, is another soap that talks about how it's not just getting me clean, but keeping the environment clean by avoiding a bunch of chemicals that would end up in the water stream. And they also donate bars of soap to homeless shelters to make sure they get clean and they can clean up their lives. Well, that all of a sudden gets me excited because now for my same basically $2, I not only get my bar of soap and I get clean, but I get to feel really good about helping the environment and helping homeless people get back on their feet. That means for the consumer, they're getting a lot more for their money. And this fits really well into the marketing trend we see of conspicuous consumption. So this is why people buy Priuses or Tom's shoes, is because it's not just the shoes they're buying, it's how it makes them feel about buying those shoes. And then on the other side, for brands, as I just mentioned before, the more you invest in relevant impact initiatives, the more it reinforces your brand. So by spending money in relevant areas of impact for your brand, you're also getting marketing dollars on that spend as well. So you get a lot more value for your money, and your customer gets more value for their money. So that's why that one's a fun sleeper to include here. And then empathy is seems probably pretty obvious, but it's the idea that you truly understand your consumer. And if you do understand them, you understand what they actually care about and how they want their brands to show up in the world. So if you're following along, if you're walking your talk and doing what you say you're going to do, and it's in a relevant way to your consumer, something that they actually care about, then you will show up higher on empathy scores. All right, so thanks again. Well, we got one more game for you, so stay tuned. But now let's start thinking about putting this into practice. So there's a world, like so many areas of impact. We've all seen the sustainable development goals. We've all seen all the issues in the world, from hunger to education to social justice to all these different kind of movements popping up, to, you know, whether it's GMOs or, you know, whatever, there's an issue for everybody. And that's represented by this giant white circle. There's just so much possible positive impact you could make as a company. But you're just one company. You're a brand that needs to be authentic and have your own relevant impact. So this gray circle over to the right represents your brand. You can't do everything, and you shouldn't do everything. So the idea is that you should find the areas that overlap with your brand and focus on those. Let's show some good and bad examples. So this is one of my favorite whoopsie moments for a brand, which was, I think it was a year or two ago when Pepsi decided they wanted to raise their flag for the Black Lives Matter movement. And they put together this whole commercial. I can't remember if it played during the Super Bowl or some other time, but this big production with a bunch of people on the streets protesting, just this whole, you know, big scene. And then Kendall Jenner walks up, hands up a soda, a Pepsi, to the police officer, and that's supposed to have fixed everything and brought the police and the Black Lives Matter movement people together and solve, you know, world peace and all this other kind of stuff. So beyond the fact that that's just a ridiculous idea that a Pepsi is going to solve everything, it was also a big WTF moment for people, because what? Why Pepsi? Why? Since when does Pepsi care about this? It just seemed like a play for attention and popularity. They just wanted to fit in. They just wanted to say they care about it without actually having any substance in that situation. So the way this came across to consumers is that it was trivializing the Black Lives Matter movement, and people were just confused, like, why Kendall Jenner, why Pepsi? Like, it just didn't make any sense on many levels. If Pepsi had a tool like ProQuo or the framework that we're about to present to you, they could have avoided a disaster like this, where they had to pull that commercial and apologize to the community, because they obviously showed a severe lack of empathy by releasing that commercial. And they would have most certainly dropped in relevance, because people would have seen them as just outdated and making a play for popularity, and it just wouldn't have come across as authentic, right? But if they had run that by someone first, or run it through a platform like ProQuo, they could have avoided that disaster. So let's look at a better example. So Nike, around the same time, also wanted to get involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, right? So they took one of their athletes, Colin Kaepernick, and put him on a big billboards and all these things in Times Square, with the statement, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything." So for those of you who don't remember, Colin is the one who started the taking a kneel movement during the NFL to kind of raise awareness for Black Lives Matter as an athlete. So what Nike did is they said, you know what, we stand behind this because it fits our ethos, because we believe in just standing up for what you believe in. We believe in going out there and being your best and giving it your all, even if you have to sacrifice for it. So the difference here is that they were featuring an athlete that they'd already, I believe, sponsored in the past. So it's relevant to them. It's an athlete. They sell athletic equipment. So obviously that makes sense. they're an aspirational brand. They're always featuring Olympic athletes or professional athletes. So this fits in with aspiration again. And as a company that supports athletics, they're supporting all the people out there who want to get out and do something active, and supporting like Black Lives Matter was relevant to them, right? Whereas Pepsi, you're like, what? How does that make any sense whatsoever? So with this ad, for sure, it was controversial as well. They had a bunch of people saying they were going to boycott them and never buy their shoes again. But what they knew is that their actual customers, the ones who show up and buy their product on the regular, cared about this movement because they had empathy, right? They knew this was something relevant for them. And their stock rose $6 billion almost overnight because of this ad campaign. Where they failed maybe is that the criticisms were that they didn't have an action plan set up for how they were going to actually do some work to help the Black Lives Matter movement or help the social justice movement. But they at least planted their flag, and it resonated with folks. So if Nike had ProQuo, they would have seen their connection scores rise because they would have showed up being super relevant to their true customers. And, it further deepened their aspirational qualities, because not only was he a professional athlete, but a professional athlete who took a stand for something he believed in, and their customers want to do the same. So those are just kind of two different examples of how relevancy matters. Now let's play another game. So this time, instead of a poll, we're going to have you pop some of these answers into the chat pod. Knowing what you know about these 5 brands, which I think most of them are internationally recognizable, maybe not Home Depot, but the other ones for sure. So just take a stab at matching the letter with the brand to see if you can guess which one of these is an authentic impact for that brand, or is the actual impact they make. We'll give you, I don't know, a minute or so.
Let's take some guesses, guys.
Feel free to just take a stab at one brand, or, try the whole line. It's up to you.
I think this game is stumping them, Gage.
Oh, there we go. All right, so let's reveal the answers and see how you did. All right, so the most confusing one, in my opinion, was Starbucks uplifting communities affected by disaster. That's kind of one of those things where you're like, Starbucks, really? Okay, I don't really get it, but good on them. That's a cool mission. It's not super relevant. Their investment's not investing in their impact investments, not reinforcing their brand in any way. It's not a bad thing per se. They're not the Pepsi commercial, but it's also not super relevant. Whereas Disney, with Make-A-Wish Foundation, what kid doesn't wish to go to Disneyland, right? So of course, if so many kids are already making a wish to go to Disneyland, why wouldn't Disney step in and help out? You could have also potentially argued for McDonald's in that one, since they also do a lot of work with kids with the Ronald McDonald House, but it's more obvious for Disney. Apple, obviously, e-waste, of course, they're the only ones that make electronics on here, so it's almost just their ethical responsibility to deal with e-waste. Home Depot, fairly obvious, building and repairing homes. That's where else would you go other than Home Depot for that kind of stuff? And since a lot of builders are veterans, it makes sense for them to specifically help veterans. And then McDonald's with their $1 menu, obviously they're in the best position to feed the homeless, whereas Starbucks has food too, but it's not as obvious because they're not accessibly priced. All right, so that just kind of further solidifies why relevancy matters, and why investing in an impact area that makes sense for your brand will not only make it obvious, but also reinforce your brand. All right, so now we're going to give you a tool so that you can avoid the Pepsi situation and try to filter your ideas, because again, there's so many positive impact ideas out in the world. You want to run them through a filter to make sure it's relevant for your brand. So since everyone has completely different brand strategy framework, we decided to put together something that would kind of generically fit any situation. So think of this as a filter where you're going to dump a bunch of ideas in the top of the filter and see how many come out the bottom. There's 3 layers. First, you want to make sure your impact opportunity is relevant to your core product or service, the product that people really know you for. And then secondly, you want to make sure that your impact initiative is relevant to the problem you solve. So that's the problem you set out as a company to solve that caused you to come up with all the solutions you've created as products or services. And then lastly, you want to think about why your customer buys your product specifically. So let's put this into context. Let's say you run an organic dairy company, and that's the product you're known for: milk, creamer, cheese, eggs, etc. So you have organic dairy products. You set out to fix the broken food system, get all the chemicals out, maybe create a more regional distribution system, like lots of things wrong with the food system that you could be fixing. Customers are buying your product specifically because they care about their health and they believe that organic grass-fed dairy is going to be better for them. So now let's say you wanted to get involved in this kind of social justice, Black Lives Matter movement or something like that. Great on you. That's awesome. Maybe one of the ideas that you came up with is a diversity scholarship. Awesome idea. I've thought about the same thing myself, but let's see if it fits here. Is that relevant to organic dairy? Not really. Is that relevant to a broken food system? Not so much. Is that relevant to health? Probably not really relevant there either. But don't give up just yet. Come up with some more ideas. What if instead of a diversity scholarship, you could kind of do the same thing by providing free food vouchers for people of color in school, for example, underserved communities, et cetera. They could apply for it, or you could award it based on grades, whatever. We don't have to get into the specifics, but let's run that through the filter. Is that relevant to organic dairy? Well, yes, because you could be giving them your actual product as part of that. Is it relevant to a broken food system? Well, yes, considering accessibility and price and a bunch of other things are part of that broken food system, providing good quality, nutritious food to students who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it or find it locally would be super relevant. And then health, is that relevant to that student's health? Well, absolutely. The more nutritious food they're taking in while in school, the better they're going to do in school, right? So you will effectively help them maybe even more than if you just gave a scholarship by doing these food vouchers, and it will come across as a no duh. Of course, an organic dairy is going to give food away as part of their impact initiative. So let's try another example just to make sure this is clear. If your product is plastic-free, reusable water bottles, and the problem you set out to solve was to avoid the toxic chemicals that leach from your plastic into water, and the reason why people buy yours over someone else's reusable bottle is because yours is fully recyclable because it's made of one single material. So great. How would that work out? Let's say you wanted to do local park beautification. And is that relevant to plastic-free bottles? Well, I put a maybe on this one because maybe the park was just littered with a bunch of trash and some of that is plastic water bottles. So, maybe cleaning that up is somewhat relevant, but not obvious. Is it relevant to toxic chemicals? Well, not really. Relevant to recyclable? If you put a bunch of recycling bins there, maybe that furthers your mission, right? But on the flip side, if you instead invested in ocean plastic removal, that's very relevant to plastic-free bottles because a lot of plastic bottles end up in the ocean. So pulling those back out is part of your mission to create a plastic-free world. Is it relevant to chemicals? Absolutely. If you're worried about the chemicals for humans getting absorbed through their water intake, what about all those fish and other aquatic life? You don't want them to be poisoned either. So that makes sense. And then is it relevant to recyclable? Of course, the more things we recycle, the fewer things end up in the ocean. And this is literally probably a recycling initiative. By removing that plastic, you can then recycle it. So those are two ways that you can use this framework. In case you didn't write it down or take a screenshot, here's your chance. Definitely put this into practice, see how it works, test it with your impact ideas, and let us know how it worked for you. And then, of course, again, the main takeaway, even if you don't use this tool, is to, whenever you're thinking about making a positive impact, make sure it's you have an authentic brand and you align that impact to your brand to get the best results, because that authentic brand builds trust, gets people to take action. And when you have relevant impact, people will take action and help spread your initiative, participate in it, and so on and so forth. So that's the main takeaway here. A few tips though, as you put this into practice, is number one, you want to think beyond words and donation, by which I mean, don't just say you stand for something, do something about it. And don't just write a check, get your team out into the world doing stuff, right? Because that's going to be more than building connection. You're also going to build some empathy there, and you're going to, have some boots on the ground, and you're going to see what it's actually like in the world and maybe come up with even better ways to make an impact. Two, if the filter denies your idea, that's okay. Just try reframing it. There's a million different ways to make an impact in a specific area. You just have to find the way that's relevant for you as a brand. Then, of course, scale is easier with focus. If you try to do 200 different impact initiatives, you're only going to move the needle a tiny little bit on all of them, if at all. But if you pick 1 to 3 things that are super, super relevant to your brand, you're going to be able to make a huge impact in those areas, not only because it's more relevant to your brand and it'll work better, but because you'll get to invest more resources in that specific area. 4, you're going to weave your impact throughout your brand, because what good does your good do if it's just hidden in your sustainability report or buried on some page on your website? Nobody ever sees it. So not only does getting that messaging woven throughout your brand matter so that people know what you're doing and can participate in it, but the more you weave it throughout your brand, the more you'll find opportunities to make small tweaks in the way you manufacture products, in the way you sell products, in the way you distribute products, and the way you market yourself, that will make an even bigger impact, because you'll be looking at your brand more holistically. And then, of course, test your ideas before you put them out there. In case you're not sure whether or not this is the right idea, run it through a filter, run it through a tool like ProQuo to make sure that this is going to work before you launch it, so you don't end up with a very expensive mistake. So with that said, thank you for caring about making a positive impact and for showing up here today to work together to figure out how we can do more good in the world. I appreciate you coming out. And if you want to get in touch with questions, join the free community or anything else, you can find me at gage@modernspecies.com or find the community at evolvecpg.com. And then, of course, ProQuo, if you want to learn more about that, set up a demo or anything like that, you can reach out to hello@proquoai.com or just visit the website and learn more about the drivers. Some links were just also dropped in the chat pod.
Yep. Yeah, we just put some links in the chat. So go ahead and go there if you want to learn any more about either of these things, a ProQuo, any of the topics that Gage discussed today. Gage, thank you so much. Really, really useful, really great stuff. If you have any questions, if anyone wants to throw comments into the chat now, otherwise we'll follow up with a recording of this webinar. And so you can get in touch with us with any questions that way as well. I don't see any questions coming through. So yeah, so why don't we go ahead and give you guys some time back, and thank you again for coming, and we'll be in touch with everyone. Thanks, Gage.
Thank you all.
Everyone. Have a good day. Bye.